Yes, hello again and welcome back to Classic Dirt Bike TV. Now, we have just made the 3-hour journey from my hometown of Dunfermline in Fife to the Scottish ferry port of Cairnryan. And well, of course, we're here to catch the ferry across the Irish Sea to cover that 2-day charity scramble event that's held at Cecil Pearsons' lovely racetrack. Now, it's a full 2 days of racing on Friday night and, of course, on the Saturday afternoon. So we're looking forward to some good looking bikes and, of course, some classic racing. Now, we'll try, once we get on the ferry, we'll try and bring you some nice pictures from the ferry looking back towards Scotland, and of course as we arrive in the Irish ferry port of Belfast. So stay tuned to my channel for a good weekend of classic racing right here on your favourite Classic Dirt Bike TV channel. Okay, just before we get down to looking at some of those bikes from the paddock, a little background information about the crossing on the ferry. Now, for me personally, this was a 3-hour drive to the ferry port of Cairnryan on the west coast of Scotland, and I was travelling with Stena Line, although of course other ferry operators are available. Now, from Cairnryan to Belfast, it's normally just over 2 hours to cross the 40-mile stretch of the Irish Sea, but there's certainly plenty to do on board the ferry during that time, as they have things like a food hall, shops, a bar for those not driving, of course, and they also have a cinema and computers games room for the kids to keep them occupied. Now, one of the things to watch out for if you're heading to Ireland with your dirt bikes for a classic racing event, those very nice people at the customs checkpoint certainly don't like you carrying any flammable liquids or extra fuel for your bikes, and if they catch you with cans of petrol or even methanol, they'll confiscate them at the port. So please make sure that you place them in a secure storage point where those extremely nice customs people can't get their hands on them. But if you're thinking of making the trip to this 2-day charity event in maybe 2022, don't just come over for the 2 days and then head back home. Try and make a holiday of the trip and then see some of the sights of Northern Ireland, like the Giant's Causeway, and maybe even visit the Titanic Quarter in Belfast, where the mighty Titanic was made. But there's loads to see and do in this wonderful country, and the other plus is, of course, that the venue where this charity scramble event is held is just a short 20 or 30 minutes drive from the ferry port of Belfast, so what's not to like? But one thing you're almost guaranteed when you arrive at this ferry port of Belfast, you'll certainly be given a very warm welcome by the club members of the Northern Ireland Classic Scramble Club. So make a point in visiting in 2022. Well, hello again and thanks for joining me here on Classic Dirt Bike TV. Now, it was a bit of a rough crossing from Scotland across the Irish Sea to Ballysallagh Road here near Bangor. And of course we're here for the 2-day charity scramble event hosted by the Northern Ireland Classic Scrambles Club. Now, this is the first day, of course, Friday, and we will have, I think it's 2 blocks of racing for the Friday evening, and of course tomorrow, Saturday, we will have a full programme of classic racing. So there's plenty to be doing here at this Northern Ireland Classic Scrambles over the course of the 2 days. So before we get down to any racing, let's do our usual walk around the paddock and have a look at some of those Irish machines that have come to race at this 2-day event here at Ballysallagh Road. Okay, so the first bike that we're going to look at in this part 1 from the 2-day charity scramble event in Northern Ireland is this lovely looking CZ belonging to Adrian Lapin. Now, as you've no doubt guessed, this is not one of your original CZs from back in the day, because this machine of Adrian's has quite a nice selection of tricked up parts fitted onto it, but it's all been tastefully done, and it certainly looks great, as you can see. Now, this particular clip is just a quick look at Adrian's machine in this video, but we will do a more comprehensive video on this bike in a future posting here on my Classic Dirt Bike TV channel, so look out for that particular clip coming soon. Now, here we have a nice pair of Falcon rear shocks on Adrian's bike with those personalised red shock bodies, and if I'm not mistaken, this bike's also got a pair of Husqvarna front and rear brake hubs fitted. But this Cerakote finish is certainly a nice touch on this bike's engine casings, and it certainly gives it that something different. And naturally, Adrian's had the old gear shift removed and has fitted one of these newer upgraded parts in its place, which of course helps eliminate that long throw that you normally get with these old CZ two-strokers. Now again, we have a more modern Mikuni carburetor to replace that troublesome standard Jikov carb, which to be fair wasn't the best carburetor ever invented on these CZ bikes. And another nice upgrade is this GMC exhaust system made by Jeff Morris Concepts, and this is another one of the many new parts that's fitted to Adrian's bike. Now, as I said, Adrian's used Husqvarna hubs on both the front and rear of his new bike, and in fact I think that these front forks could also be Swedish Husky units that he's fitted to the front end. But you have to say it's still a cracking looking little twin shock racer, and as I said, we will take a closer look at this bike in a future video here on my channel, so please make sure that you subscribe to hear all about how this bike was put together. Now, these next two lovely Husqvarna bikes also belong to Adrian, and this yellow plated number 2 bike will be raced at this charity event by Tommy Merton. And if you've never seen Tommy ride this bike in previous videos here on my channel, then you're really in for a treat when he takes to the track on this 430 CR in the grade A class of the twin shocks. Now, Tommy Merton, of course, is considered among one of the top twin shock riders in his native Northern Ireland, so make sure that you subscribe to my channel in order that you don't miss out in seeing Tommy perform on this super quick Husky 430. But this particular 430 bike is all set up and prepared by Adrian Lapin, and basically Tommy Merton then just turns up and slings his leg over this bike and then completely obliterates the rest of the competition. Now, this other 250 Husky of Adrian's is basically just a standby spare bike should Tommy have any mechanical issues with the big 430 CR. But these three examples between the CZ and both these Husqvarnas are just a sample of the many bikes that Adrian has at home in his vast dirt bike collection, and maybe Classic Dirt Bike TV will have to maybe pay a visit to his place next year and see what other hidden treasures that Adrian has locked away in his vintage dirt bike vault. But certainly a lovely pair of Husqvarna twin shockers, and look out for Tommy Merton in action on the track when I post the racing videos from this event, which will be coming soon. Okay, our next featured machine is, believe it or not, another of those Czechoslovakian CZs, and this time it's the Northern Ireland Classic Scramble Club's committee member John Collings 1972-74 250 bike. Now this is not a fully original machine due to the fact that it has a 1972 frame, and it also has the later 1974 250 motor. Now John, I think, is currently selling this little bike as he no longer uses it, and I think he already has a buyer for this particular bike, but this would certainly be a nice starter machine for somebody to take up vintage racing. Now John told me that he's recently spent a bit of cash on building this bike, and the motor has had a completely brand new rebuild, and he's also waiting on a set of brand new Hagen rear shocks to fit to this bike. So somebody is going to pick up a very nice little CZ race bike when John eventually gets this bike sold. But of course, as I've said in previous videos here on my channel, these old CZ bikes certainly do make excellent starter machines if you want to try your hand at vintage racing, because they are very quick, they're reasonably reliable, and of course spare parts are easy enough to come by. So this little 250 will be a decent bike for somebody if they want to relive their youth and get back onto the racetrack. Now the other plus of this little bike is of course that it's a 250 and not a more intimidating 360 or 380 bike. So in that respect it would certainly be an easy little machine to handle if you were a vintage motocross virgin. Okay, next up it's the turn of Wesley Sloan's YZ 490 Yamaha. Now these old air hammers, as they were sometimes known, were seriously quick bikes way back in the day. Well, I suppose they still are pretty quick, but it's not everybody that can tame these fiery 490s, as of course they had a bit of a reputation for being snappy off the throttle, and that was of course as long as you could hold on to the bars in the first place, because the motors did tend to pink and vibrate, and that's one of the reasons that they hung the Air Hammer title on them when they were first released in the 1980s. But despite that, there was certainly no underestimating the grunt that these two-stroke reed valve Yamaha motors produced, because these were seriously powerful motors, and when you bought one brand new you had to then do a bit of fettling and tuning to the ignition and carb settings just to get that engine running right. But when they were all sorted and the right rider in the saddle, you certainly had no worries being Mr. Holeshot when these rocket ships left the line. But these big 490s, as you know, weren't for your average club rider, and they certainly don't do pottering around a racetrack for a little Sunday stroll looking at the scenery. You've got to take these big 490s by the scruff of the neck and then show them who's the boss, and when you ride them you've got to ride them hard, and if you like your old motocrossers fast and scary, then these 490s will certainly tick both those boxes in every respect. But this is still a nice example of Wesley's, and it's still in quite nice original condition, and you can catch a glimpse of Wesley riding this bike in one of the 3 twin shock grade classes over the course of the 2 days. So look out for Wesley on the track, because he'll certainly be the one who makes it to the top of the hill first time if I know the speed of these old 490s. Now next up, these old CZs just keep coming, and this 1984 example belongs to Mark Harrison. Now I'm sure that back in the day these were designated the 514 models, and as you can see they had quite long legs at the front, and also surprisingly they were still using drum brakes on the front and rear of these bikes even in 1984, when of course most dirt bike manufacturers had by this time changed to more modern hydraulic disc brakes. Now I'm not entirely sure here, but I think this could be a 380 motor in this particular CZ. Now as I remember, these 514s weren't as good as the older original CZs of the 1970s, and because these bikes were sold exclusively within Eastern Europe, they were never really raced against the best and the state-of-the-art production bikes from Japan. But they still stayed in production right up until the early 1990s, until they were eventually imported into the USA by American Jawa as play bikes. Now of course, as you'd expect, these 514 CZs are not as common a sight as the likes of the older Falta replica works machines were in the 1970s, but there are still one or two of these going around these days, and you certainly don't see many taking part in classic scrambles. But it does look like Mark does a bit of filming when he's racing, as he appears to have this GoPro camera mount on his handlebars. But again, it's quite good to see one of these much rarer CZs from 1984, and this 514 model of Mark's will be taking to the track in Grade C of the Twin Shock races, so look out for Mark having a bit of fun on his old 514 in the coming racing footage here on my channel. Okay, next up, something completely different, and this old vintage classic is William Barr's old Jap powered classic racer. Now I don't know much about William's bike, as there was actually nobody around when I grabbed these short clips in the paddock, but the motor for sure is a long stroking methanol burning 4-stroke Jap 600 power plant. Now these Jap engines were originally of course designed to be used in speedway bikes, and they had dry clutches and of course a total loss oil lubrication system, whereby you filled the frame with a few litres of oil, and then this little pump on the side of the motor then pumped the oil around the important parts of the engine, and then it exited onto the ground, and of course hence the term total loss oil lubrication. Now just before John Alfred Prestwich began designing motorcycle engines, he was a mechanical engineer making movie projectors for the film industry at the turn of the century, and these old Jap motors were designed and built by John Prestwich in the 1930s. Although when you look at this motor, it looks like it's been modified to work with a wet clutch, and this casing looks like it's been taken from a BSA or other British made bike, because normally this part of the motor would just be an alloy cover with a dry clutch connected to the crankshaft by a chain. But nevertheless, a nice looking old bike, and as you'd expect, pretty quick on the track, and William will be racing this old timer against the much more modern twin shock bikes in the grade B class. Now, just to conclude this first walk through the Charity Scramble paddock for part 1, we have to certainly take a look at Cecil Pearsons' lovely collection of Rickman Stitt Jap Scramblers. Now, it's thanks to Cecil that we have this event each year, and he allows us all to use his fantastic racetrack for this charity bash each time, and he brings along this very unique collection of old vintage race bikes for his team of riders to ride. But when I eventually get around to editing and posting the racing footage from this event, you can see Cecil's riders, including James Thompson, Harry Stitt, John Griffiths and Adrian Lapin, and of course Cecil himself, all put these bikes through their paces on the track. But don't be fooled by these machines' old school appearance. These are still seriously quick bikes, and they're more than a match for much more modern machinery, and frequently finish well ahead of the competition when they take to the track. Now, Cecil currently has 9 of these very unique machines. He has 6 bikes with the Rickman frames and Jap 600 motors, and 3 relatively new special built Harry Stitt frames with these Jap motors to power them. But it's certainly a labour of love for Cecil, and an almost full-time occupation just keeping all these bikes running and in working condition. But engine parts for these Jap motors, he tells me, are getting harder and harder to find, which is not surprising considering how old the engine technology is. But without doubt, this is one of the most unique collections of vintage motocrossers you're ever going to find. And of course, these things don't run on regular petrol, but on the highly flammable methanol fuel, which of course increases the motor's power. It also helps to contain the pre-ignition, and it makes the engine run slightly cooler than a normal petrol equivalent. But it's certainly a very unique collection of old vintage race bikes. Now, getting one of these old Japs fired up is quite a simple process, as our man here, Cecil, is about to demonstrate in this short clip.
This may not be the one to start first time.
And so there you have it, the first batch of bikes from the paddock at this 2-day charity scramble event. So look out for the remaining collection of bikes from the paddock coming up in part 2. And of course, immediately after that, we'll then post the first part of the racing from the Friday evening's race programme. So make sure that you continue to subscribe to my channel in order that you don't miss out on any future video postings from your #1 Classic Dirt Bike TV channel.